in. So I want to just kind of get started with how we came about with this whole engineering change with modern figures series of special podcast episodes. And really in response to a lot of the recent events that have happened, a lot of people are becoming aware of challenges with diversity, equity, and inclusion, that are having conversations they haven't had before, having to make decisions that they haven't even thought about before. And so we had a first episode where we talked to some of the people who were leading some of that change. In our second episode, we talked to some people who have been allies and advocates, kind of boots on the ground for years, to share strategies for being good allies. And this time we're talking to leaders who are not only leading the changes we need to see, but who have really broken down barriers to create a path for a lot of us to follow. And so we're going to jump right in. First of all, just kind of introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Yvette E. Pearson. I am host of Engineering Change Podcast. I'm also founder and lead consultant of the Peer Group, which is an education, research, and evaluation consulting company. And during my day job, I'm an associate dean in the School of Engineering at Rice University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Kyla McMullen. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering at the University of Florida. I'm also the co-host of Modern Figures podcast, where we look at different voices and try to highlight Black women who are in tech.
And I'm Dr. Jeremy Waysome. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Engineering Education at the University of Florida. I also serve as special assistant to the Dean of the Graduate School in the Division of Graduate Student Affairs. I work with Kyla as co-host of Modern Figures podcast.
Okay, so our first panelist today of our esteemed group of panelists is Dr. Stephanie Adams, and she's the dean in the Johnson School of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Texas at Dallas. She is a distinguished person who I can't even read all of her awards, but she holds a PhD. For some of her background, she holds a PhD in interdisciplinary engineering from Texas A&M, and she also served as the president of the American Society for Engineering Education, or ASEE, from 2019 to 2020. She earned her BS in mechanical engineering with honors from North Carolina A&T State University and her Master of Engineering from the University of Virginia. Her research interests, they include faculty and graduate student development, international collaborations, team effectiveness, collaboration and active learning, and quality control management. And she's a renowned leader in efforts to broaden participation for women and underrepresented minorities in engineering. If that's not enough, she served as the program director in engineering education and centers division of the NSF. And in 2003, she also received the Career Award. She has an amazing list of awards from places like WEPAN, NSBE, ASEE, DuPont. Just Google her. All I can say is Google it. But thank you. So we're so fortunate to have you today.
I'm delighted to be here.
And next we have Dr. Reginald Desroches. Reggie is provost of Rice University as of 2 weeks officially, I believe. And prior to that, he was my direct supervisor as Dean of Engineering at Rice University. His background is in civil and environmental engineering, and he's a professor in that department as well as in our Department of Mechanical Engineering. And he's also a member of the National Academy of Engineering, which was a recent election this year. Reggie's primary area of research is in the design of resilient infrastructure systems under extreme loads and the application of smart materials. He was the person who led the United States response to the earthquake disaster in Haiti. And so he, again, just like Dr. Adams, just truly renowned in his field and has a list of awards and honors too numerous to list here, but we captured a few of the distinguished ones: the Arnold Kerr Lecturer Award, the John A. Bloom Distinguished Lecturer Award, and the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute Distinguished Lecturer Award. So thank you for being with us, Reggie.
Thanks for having me, Yvette. I'm honored to be part of this group.
Okay, and our final panelist is Dr. Bevlee Watford. She is a professor of engineering education in the College of Engineering at Virginia Tech. Since 1992, she has been the founding executive director for the Center for Enhancement of Engineering Diversity, or SEED. This year, she became the founding associate dean for equity and engagement at Virginia Tech. In her tenure, she has secured more than $12 million in funding and support for SEED and other undergraduate initiatives. Her research activities have primarily focused on the recruitment and retention of students in engineering, with a particular emphasis on underrepresented students. From 2004 to 2005, she was president of WEPAN and has served on the board of directors for NMEPA, which is the National Association of Minority Engineering Program Administrators. And we actually had some great conversations at NMEPA at Virginia Tech a couple of years ago. She was formerly the ASEE president for 2017-18, and she previously chaired the diversity task force that resulted in the creation of the ASEE Diversity Strategic Plan, as well as the formation of the ASEE Diversity Committee. Watford has received numerous awards, just like our other esteemed guests tonight. And I'm not going to name all of them, but some of them include the WEPAN Founders Award, the Claire Felbinger Diversity Award from ABET, and the Nestle ExxonMobil Impact Award. So thank you so much, Bev, for being here tonight.
No problem. I'm glad to help.
I'm just amazed, really, first of all, that we were able to get all three of you, but then to find one time that all three of you are available. I mean, that was miraculous in and of itself. So thank you again. I wanted to kind of start because I have the privilege and I really feel blessed to know all three of you personally and have engaged with you over years. And so I know probably a bit more about your background. And I know that in this concept of being trailblazers, you all have been the first and been the only with a lot of your endeavors. And I kind of wanted to get a start there to just kind of talking about some of those barriers that you have overcome and the walls that you've torn down in blazing the path to where your leadership has taken you. And anybody can jump in at any time.
Okay, I'll jump in first because I think I took a much more non-traditional path than either Stephanie or Reggie. You know, I got my PhD in industrial engineering and I got a tenure track assistant professor job. And it was about 2 years into the job when I realized that I did not like it. What I really liked was working with students. I just really enjoyed working with students. So I told myself I would get through tenure, I'd get promoted, and then I was out. Okay. And people told me that I was just really making in fact, someone's exact words were a tragic career move when I left my tenure track position and took an administrative position at Virginia Tech, and I became the MEP director at Virginia Tech. I got a tenured spot in industrial engineering. You know, I was still trying to hold on to that, but eventually through the work of a lot of really good people, I believe Norman, in fact, with F.ASCE, engineering education evolved and Virginia Tech became the second. Purdue was the first department. Virginia Tech was a hot, like 3-4 months behind them. And my dean at the time said, that's where you belong. That's what you should be doing. And that's where you will do well. So it ended up, I was actually, I think, the third full professor of engineering education in the US behind Kamyar and Hayden, my boss. So, and it worked out. I mean, it actually just worked out. I am a strong believer in doing what makes you happy. And, you know, my kids and my husband say I work too much, and I do it because I love my job, and I've always loved my job. So anyway, that's me.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to that. And I actually didn't know that part of your background And Norman's program with the National Academies, the KC program, is exactly how I got involved in engineering education.
Okay.
Yeah. Reggie or Stephanie?
I'll yield to the provost.
Okay. So I just talked a little bit about, maybe I'll just talk about my first administrative experience and how that both shaped me and the challenges that I faced with that. So my first academic position was at Georgia Tech. I was a faculty member there. And a funny story about how I ended up at Tech is everybody knows Gary May, of course. And Gary and I were good friends at Berkeley. And I had a couple of job interviews. None of them were successful. And I picked up the phone and called Gary, who had been at Georgia Tech for 3 years, and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job. Can you pass my CV along to the chair of the civil engineering department at Georgia Tech?" And he did. And a few weeks later, I got a call for an interview. And a few months later, I ended up getting the job. And so I used my connections with Gary May to get that position at Georgia Tech. Fast forward probably 13 or 14 years after having been at Georgia Tech and moved up the ranks as full professor, I become a candidate for the department chair role, school chair. It's called a school, fairly large department, 60 faculty, top 5 ranked civil engineering department. And what was challenging for me in that role was having been sort of the junior faculty member there and having all these senior people being my mentors and having to sort of change. And now I'm the boss and I had to play a very different role and it really changes how you think about things. And, it was a challenge for people that I sort of been my mentor. Now I'm telling them, what to do and playing a supervisory role. But it was really, for me, it was a position I think that had a lot of growth for me. It really allowed me to sort of step out of my usual box as a researcher. And it really is a position that I grew. I learned a lot from. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot from it, and from there on became a dean, and then most recently a provost. So I'll leave it right there and pass the buck to Stephanie.
Thank you. So I think for me, the poem "The Road Less Traveled" summarizes my journey. I grew up on a college campus, so it wasn't long. It didn't take me long to figure out that was my sweet spot. I enjoyed the intellectual, conversation. But I never saw myself getting a PhD. I saw myself running student programs. That's actually when Bev and I first met. We were both running student programs. I was at NC State. But I very quickly figured out I'd already hit the glass ceiling and I was probably 27. So I had to do something different. So I went back to get a PhD. My long-term goal was to go back to the greatest institution on earth, North Carolina A&T, and become a faculty member there. And I tried to get now Chancellor Martin to hire me to run his student programs. And he said, "You're too talented not to go get a PhD." And so I did. And I ended up at Texas A&M and I met Karen Watson. And Karen was, everything at A&M, was a great professor, had become associate dean, but she allowed me to work in the dean's office as my assistantship. And they had something called the Foundation Coalition, which introduced me to engineering education. And so NSF, funded these coalitions around the country to think about how we deliver undergraduate education. I had been a minority engineering program, a logical segue. I never really saw myself teaching and doing research, but I took this route to get a PhD. And so when I graduated, I absolutely didn't want to go into the academy, because everybody always said, people who can go in industry and people who can't go teach. And so Karen's role was, no, you need to go and teach. And so I went off to the University of Nebraska as an untenured faculty member, and people looked at me and thought, Nebraska, are there any even Black people in Nebraska? So I had a lot of firsts and challenges there, but it ended up being the right place for me. People talk about sometimes, I guess I'll come back to that poem, going somewhere where there are not a lot of people, right? So I had an opportunity to go to Atlanta. I had an opportunity to go to Blacksburg to work at Virginia Tech, and there were people of color there. But going to Nebraska, I got there on the right day. And so I put my head down and tried to figure out this thing called tenure. And then in year 4, I was tapped to go work in the graduate school because I had worked for the Jim Fellowship Consortium, and I recruited minority students to go to graduate school, and they needed a person that looked like me in the graduate school. And I was the only person on campus that had any, skill set to do that job. And everybody told me, like, Bev, you're going to kill your career if you go do this. And I remember something I read, Marlo Thomas, who played that girl. She was the daughter of a famous actor. And she said her dad told her, run your race, baby, put your blinders on and run your race, create your own path. Don't worry about the fact that you have my name, find your own niche. And so that's what motivated me to put my head down, and engineering education started. So I was a special engineering professor doing research in engineering education. And people didn't even know what to make of me. They were like, okay, she's not going to get tenure. What are we going to do? And in year 4, when I became an administrator, I got my NSF Career Award. And that was it. I haven't looked back since. I mean, there's been no doubt about anything that I've wanted to do. I put my head down and I've worked hard. And, I like to think that I prepared myself. So when opportunities presented themselves to me, I was ready. And I think that's made all the difference for me.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for also mentioning Jim. They're actually in the chat. National Gym Consortium has shouted us out. They said you are an awesome group of individuals. Count them 3 Gym alum with amazing stories to tell. So I just wanted to say that real quick.
So I have a question. In our first episode of the podcast, I brought up the concept of leadership and how people ultimately made the decision to pursue it. And then I was attacked with compliments. And I was excited about it, but I was really interested in learning about why the panelists pursued leadership roles in the first place. And so my question to you is kind of tangential to that. How do you know that you are blazing a trail and not just kind of charting your own path through leadership?
That's interesting. So I don't think I realized I was blazing a trail originally. I think I just was doing the work. I had an interest in helping students. And so I just wanted to do that. And that was my path. And then one day you look up and, I keep mentioning Bev, but there was just Bev. There wasn't anybody else doing this work. Bev was 3, I was 1, but Bev was the only one doing the work, that I could see. And so I don't think I set out to be a trailblazer. I just set out to help people, and in helping people, you became the first of this and the first of that. And next thing you know, you're looking around and there's a few people side by side, but a whole lot more people behind you. And then you kind of have to embody this notion of, okay, wait, maybe I am a trailblazer, and in the case for Bev and Reggie and I, there's not a lot of people that look like us in our levels. You can count, there are 5 Black women deans in the country. So that kind of by default makes you a trailblazer, but I didn't set out to be a trailblazer. I just set out to help people.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That was never my intent. The thing that I brought in, and it's interesting because MEP directors had been around since the early 70s, late 70s, and doing programs mostly for African American and Hispanic students of color. Then you had women in engineering programs that evolved around the same time. The issue for me was I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to run programs for underrepresented students, and I wanted to help them be successful because, I heard Reggie going to Berkeley and Stephanie graduating with honors. I was one of those, thank you, Lordy, got my degree, okay? I struggled my first 2 years, and I had somebody that turned my life around, turned my whole attitude around. And that was the only reason I got into grad school. Was my last 2 years, I was like a 3.8, but the first 2, I'm not even going to talk about. So my thing was, I wanted to create programs that I knew would have helped me. And I talked to the other MEP directors. I remember the first meeting I went to, and I said, tell me the first things I need to do because I am brand new at this. And they said, you know, you want a tutoring program, you want to have a summer bridge program, you want to have peer mentoring for your students. I was like, okay. And I got back to Virginia Tech and looked at my little $20,000 budget and was like, yeah, that ain't gonna work. So you have to find stuff. So now I'm looking for money, right? And where do they have money? Well, corporations have money. You have to write proposals. So all of a sudden, writing proposals is not as painful as it was when I was an assistant professor, because I was writing proposals for things I wanted to do. And I actually should back up. What really convinced me was while I was still at Clemson as an assistant professor, I wrote my first NSF proposal. It was for something called the Young Scholars Program. And they were giving money. It amazed me. NSF was giving money to people, to faculty members, to run programs for high school kids. I was like, I am there. I wrote that proposal. It was funded the first shot. So my very first proposal to NSF got funded. That's what solidified for me, this is where I need to be. And I need to stop trying to force my little square self into that round hole and go somewhere else. So, you know, I've always pushed to find the money. Let me see, how should I say this? I don't believe that anybody gives you anything. You have to get it yourself. If they give it to you, fine. Don't stop that from getting it yourself. You always have to have that path. And what really changed things around for me was in, I think it was 2004, I got one of the STEP grants from NSF to run minority programs. And it just, you know, and I feel like that actually did incentivize a lot of other people, a lot of other MEPs to see we can get $2 million from NSF to support our bridge pro. Oh yeah, I'm there. So all, you know, and I was telling everybody this, you have got to get this money. And, you know, so it wasn't a matter of blazing of intentionally blazing a trail. It was a matter of intentionally supporting myself to do what I wanted to do. And I know that sounds selfish. It is.
But it was for other people. It's not selfish if it's for other people.
Right. Your purpose is
Yeah.
not selfish.
Right.
So Beverly, I'm just going to respond to your comment because I struggled at Berkeley big time. So I'm not sure if you gave the impression I didn't struggle at Berkeley. I struggled at Berkeley, and it was MEP that got me through the MEP program at the time. And I was a first generation kid coming from New York. Thought I knew math and learned early on. I probably didn't know the math the way Berkeley wanted me to know the math. And so I really struggled early on. And in fact, during my graduate school years, I ended up working as an MEP director for 2 years to sort of put myself through grad school, but really to sort of thank MEP for all they did to get me where I was. But yeah, like everybody said, when you're blazing a trail, you don't realize, at least I certainly don't realize I'm blazing a trail. I have my head down, just trying to go day to day and have an impact. And sometimes it takes years before you look back and reflect and say, boy, I sure did have an impact. I did, blaze a trail. I did, impact some young kids. And so while you're in it, you really, at least for me, I'm sort of head down, just trying to do my best, trying to be successful. One of the things that I find in these roles is I'm just, we're always the first. We're the first this, we're the first that. And I'm always afraid if I'm not successful, I'm going to be the last one. They're not going to hire another black chair. They're not going to hire another black dean. They're not going to hire another black provost if I'm not successful. So you have this sort of extra, I'm going to put in those extra hours because I want to make sure I'm not the last one. I want to make sure somebody else has this opportunity. So sometimes it's years before you turn around and say, yes, I did blaze a trail, but you're not thinking about it while you're doing it.
Yeah, I like the fact that none of you actually set out to say, I'm going to blaze a trail. You said, I'm on my trail. And if it just so happens to be blazed in the process, that's what's happening. So on the same vein of leadership, how concretely are all of your institutions, how are you using your leadership to affect change for others? Like what sorts of things, especially in light of all of the different statements around diversity and inclusion and equity that have been happening? Like, have there been any new initiatives or things that you all have pushed out or in the process of thinking about pushing out?
Well, I'll jump in first. The first thing I did was bring Yvette on board. So that's all I have to say is I was very fortunate to have Yvette. I think one of the things that's important.
Got a lot of extra gray hairs over the last month and a half.
My leadership style is to sort of try to identify talent and put them in place and give them all they need to be successful. And that was the case certainly for me with Yvette and her role that she played in the School of Engineering at Rice, and all the initiatives that she's put forth at Rice in engineering that's spread throughout campus now, and she's known as a leader in this space. And so we've been very successful, not because of me. All I did was say, Yvette, go and do it. And she's done it, and she's done a great job. So I think all of us in these positions know the importance of having the right people around you, having talented people around you, supporting them, and giving them the leeway to be drivers of change. And that was certainly the case for me with Yvette.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your support, because I find a lot of times when we are put in these positions, sometimes we're not resourced or we're under-resourced, and there's just so much you can't do if you don't have the resources to do it. So thank you for that.
The chat is saying yes.
I'll just give her another quick shout out. She had recently written a piece after George Floyd, and the president reached out to me. The university said, "Who is this person? Where did you find her?" And so she's quickly been recognized as just such a talent, and we all appreciate that. So
thank you.
You were saying the chat said something.
Oh yeah, the chat was saying yes, Dr. Pearson is a star.
Oh.
Yeah. She is.
I love my gym people. Hey, Jim.
I think I was talking to somebody the other day and talking about how I can look back and see how much I have grown, right? I have, leadership is something that you have to be able to motivate people. You have to be able to select and put the people in the right place so they will be successful doing what comes naturally to them, right? I always laugh because my line, whenever I'm interviewing someone, I tell them and I say, you can talk to my team, they'll tell you the same thing. I need people that I do not have to manage. Okay, those are the people to me. They motivate themselves. They know what they need to do. They come to me when they got problems. What I had to learn to manage was, and Reggie, you said you're from New York, so am I. Sometimes my mouth spoke before my brain got in place. Okay, so I had to learn to backpedal some things. And I'm still, people know me, I'm still known for being very blunt, very straightforward, but I have learned how to tone it down because my goal is for people to listen to me. And if I say it in the wrong way, they're not going to listen to me and they're not going to accept what I'm saying. So, one of the things that's happening now is I'm actually in a position to educate my department heads about racism and about what it's like to be a Black female in this world. Forget engineering, in the world, right? And needless to say, they're all white, and I need them to understand me. So I cannot be a bull in a china shop and try to force things down their throat. I have to lead them so that they think and understand, oh, that's what it's about. Okay. So I think that was a really important thing for me to learn and to grow into. And thank goodness it happened. That's all I can say.
So I actually want to ask, before I answer, I wanted to ask something Bev said made me think about it. So you attributed it, Bev, to being from New York. And I wonder how much of it is, going back to Reggie's point, we get one shot. So if we mess up our shot, we know we may not get another shot. So how much of it really is you're from New York, and how much of it is that excellence, that push to do the best job you can so that you get another shot or you get to move up, and then somebody else can move in as well versus it's really you from New York? Because I think it's the latter.
And I think, Steph, you're right. There are a lot of different personality traits and experiences that people have. One of the other things I think that's important for me is I'm a middle child. Okay. I was left alone in a large number. I have 4 sisters and a brother, and I was the middle. There was, 3 years going up to the next one and 5 years to the one behind me. So I was always fending for myself. My mother used to say, she used to listen to me telling myself stories, okay, just making stuff up to entertain myself. I think that gives a certain characteristic to a person, that kind of perseverance. But I will echo what you're saying. We do know that if we screw up, it's going to be bad for everybody, because all they're going to say is, look, we hired her, we tried, and look what happened. Okay. So we can't screw up. We can't.
So my response, and I'll talk about, an opportunity that I just created post George Floyd, right? So I'll just finish my first year in a couple of weeks at UT Dallas. I don't have an associate dean for diversity, though I would love to have one. And, it was in my plan, in my strategic plan for probably year 2 to have an associate dean for diversity, but I can't wait a year. So I've got to do something different. And so what I decided to do, I have an endowed chair as a dean. Like, I never thought I'd ever have an endowed chair, but I have one, and it has some money tied to it. So I decided to put my money where my mouth is. And I went to my computer one day on the weekend and created a Dean's Fellow program. And I laid it out, and I'm going to hopefully have 2 Dean's Fellows in the fall, one working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and one working on helping to advance the school and research. I don't have to go ask anybody, can I do this? We talk about being a leader. I don't have to go ask anybody for it. I don't have to ask anybody for any money to do it. I just decided I'm going to take this money from my endowed chair, and I made my little program up. I sent it to my marketing person. Hey, what do you think about this? And I sent it out. And so next week I'll have my applications back, and I'm going to have 2 faculty. Hopefully that one of them will be driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that's critical that it comes from faculty, because, faculty governance, and they need to be able to look their colleagues in the eye and say, hey, we can't tolerate this. We've got to do some things differently. So that's the part of being a leader that I like. And the piece that I'll say to folks is, Reggie talked about hiring Yvette and getting good talent. My attitude is always, I want the best person. I want to give them their resources, and I want to stay the heck out of their way. And I've never been worried about, is Yvette let's say I was Reggie, is Yvette going to outshine me? If Yvette outshines me, great, because I look smart because I hired Yvette, right? So I never get caught up in, does somebody want my job? Does somebody, do I look bad if somebody else looks good? If they look good, I look good. So, you can't be afraid to surround yourself with good people who will push back. I don't want people sitting around telling me, yeah, Dina, whatever you say, that's what I want to do. No, tell me what you think. That's how we get better.
Yeah, and related to what you just said, Stephanie, I remember that when Reggie first came in. First of all, I was associate dean before Reggie came on as dean. And so I always looked at my role as being one supportive to the dean and making sure the dean's goals and agenda was done. But when Reggie came in, it was like, I gotta make this dean shine, whatever I can do. And so, because we do feel that pressure, and we do, all of us have been told, and all of us have experienced the, twice as hard, half as far. And so that's just so very real. So I'm happy to hear you say, because I think sometimes that is a challenge for some leaders, to have people come behind them who they're kind of intimidated or afraid of, like you said, that they're going to take their shine. So I was glad to hear you highlight that.
I'm just going to comment. That was a great comment, Stephanie, about the best thing you can do is to get somebody that outshines you. I always say the best thing I could do is if I hire somebody, put somebody in a position, 3 years later, they move on to something better. I hate to lose them, but I think that's the best thing you do is provide people with opportunities to move ahead. And I think that's a sign of a good leader. And there are a lot of people that don't think that way, as you know, both of you, Stephanie and Bevlee, know people don't think that way. And I think that's one of the common leadership flaws.
So I have a question for all of you who are in these high-ranking positions. So truly selfish question. As a faculty member, we know that the higher-ups really want diversity and inclusion, all these wonderful things. But as a faculty member, that's not part of our tenure evaluation. So are there things, what do you think about the whole tenure evaluation process changing to include diversity, equity, inclusion efforts in the way that faculty are evaluated to possibly move the needle? Because for faculty, if you're not going to count that bean, then they're not going to do it. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
So I'll jump out. First of all, I hate tenure. So I don't even need to have DEI be a part of tenure. Let's abolish tenure. Let's put everybody on a 5-year contract, and these are your goals. You got to do this, this, and this. And if you do that for 5 years, you can stay another 5 years. If you don't, we put you on a corrective action plan. We clean it, help you get back on track. Then we get you straight. We give you another 5 years. But with that said, actually at Virginia Tech, when I was a department head, it's a part of the faculty evaluation. On the form, you have to say what you did to advance diversity at Virginia Tech this year. Now, as a dean, I'm coming in new, and our faculty evaluation cycle is really managed by the academic senate. So now you've got to go educate other people about how to change it. But where, as a leader, I can change it, I can hold my department heads' feet to the fire. So it's going to be a part of their plan. What are you doing? All right. So this year in hiring, I said, this is going to be important to me, and I'm going to track what you're doing. So I'm working right now on a summary chart from last year's hiring cycle. We had 20 positions. We saw 1,500 candidates. Well, we got 1,500 applications, and then we're breaking down how many candidates we saw. I don't like the way the numbers are looking. So the next go around, we're not going to have these numbers again, right? We can't have these numbers again, not in today's world. So, it's less about, it's harder to change the tenure system to make it valuable for faculty, because so much goes into that we don't control. But the things that I feel like we do control are the folks that are my department heads, the folks that are my directors. So when you're running a search, I'm going to be asking you, what's in your pool? If I don't like what you tell me, you don't get to go forward. And that's something I learned from Ruth Simmons, who was president at Brown. She used to hold back money for faculty hiring. So if you want to get a faculty line, you got to bring her some diverse candidates. You don't bring any diverse candidates, you can't get a line. And I'm like, I can do that? She said, yeah, you can do that. So I started trying to make that happen. So I don't know so much, like I said, that I can change the system, but I can definitely have an impact and an influence on how people are thinking.
But see, Steph, you've pointed out something that's really important. One of the reasons why I have stayed at Virginia Tech and thrived at Virginia Tech is because I have had bosses who supported what I did, right? What Stephanie has pointed out is that until it's all about accountability, right? If people are not held accountable for doing what you ask them to do or what they're supposed to do, then why should they bother doing it? It takes the leadership to actually hold people accountable and make something happen. Just like Stephanie said, if you do it, great, we're all good. If you don't, this is what I'm going to do. You got your choice. So it is about that. And we do now, I will say this, we've had that diversity statement in the P&T for years, 15, 16 years. And initially, when it was placed in there was an article in the Chronicle that interviewed an individual, I will not name names, an individual at Virginia Tech, and basically said, so you have this in your P&T. Well, what will happen if a faculty member does not do this? And the individual said, well, probably nothing. Okay, that just cut the rug out from under everybody. But now we've got people rising into positions of leadership who recognize that diversity is important and that it's not just my job, okay? It's everybody's job. Now, we don't want to take away from your other areas of research, but you can incorporate diversity in your other areas of research by reaching out to diverse populations and bringing them into your lab and doing things like that. But it really comes down to accountability. And unless the leadership has the guts to stand up and say, if you do not do this, I think it's important. If you do not do this, you're going to lose something.
Let me just comment on the diversity statements. I'm happy you brought that up, Bev, because I think, it's somewhat controversial now. You've seen a few articles on parts of the segments of the population pushing back on them. We recently started using them in one of the schools at Rice. I won't mention which one. In that same school, they had, in the entire history of that school, they had one Black professor. And this year they started using the diversity statements. They have 3 new Black faculty. I think it did 2 things. It obviously, it's for the candidates, and I've heard from 2 of them that I spoke to myself, it spoke to the value of the school, right? And so they said they had other options, but they said they chose Rice because they realized that because of the diversity statement, that we value that. And many other universities who don't have diversity statements, and I'm happy to hear that, Bev, they've had it for so many years at Virginia Tech, that was part of the value system of Rice. And that was one of the reasons they were so interested in the position. And it allowed us to really assess these candidates and how they think about diversity. So I think it's a great thing. And I think it's a mechanism for really assessing something that should be part of the process. And as Stephanie said, when I evaluate the chairs, because the chairs are in a role, the faculty searches are governed by the department chairs. That's part of the evaluation process, as part of the dean's evaluation process, as far as what they've done on the diversity front. So I think you're starting to see a change, but part of the challenge is, you have to get people thinking differently, right? You have to get the search committees thinking differently and thinking, not thinking about their friends and the schools that, people naturally want people like them. And until people start thinking differently, and in some cases you have to force them to think differently or have financial incentives for them to think differently, it takes time for things to change.
Yeah, and the other side of that, and with the diversity statements, so I get kind of mixed about it. I think there is benefit, and I definitely think it shows intentionality and, like Reggie said, value, that we value diversity. The challenge is now that I'm seeing consultants advertising that they'll help people write diversity statements. And so what are you really getting with the people who come in? Now, it speaks value to the diverse candidates and diverse applicants that we're trying to attract. But one very critical part of it, and really bringing about the systemic change we want to see, is evaluating what the potential of everybody is to bring, and no matter what their background and their identities are, what's their potential to contribute to an inclusive culture and climate. And that's the other piece that we're actively working on. How do we evaluate that aside from what's in a, what's in a kind of a diversity statement that ultimately may be written by a consultant if people go that route. But I do, and through one of our NSF projects that Reggie and I are leading, one of the studies we're doing is around the intentionality towards diversity in faculty hiring. And so it definitely is very critically important to show that value.
I also just wanted to bring up another event that's been going on the past couple of days. It was the Experiences of Black STEM and the Ivory, a call to disruptive action. So if you didn't hear about that, it was a collaborative effort between a number of institutions, including Georgia Tech, Boston University, UT Austin, University of Chicago, and the University of Washington. And they had students, staff, faculty, and administrators all talking about the experiences of people who are Black in the STEM disciplines. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that we've had so many events of late that have focused on this, but what comes next? And in particular, with this whole international student thing that was going on lately in current events, I think about Black students and how these activities are impacting them and how often their voices aren't included. And in this case, they were, but how are you engaging Black students on your campuses, or how have you in the past, in meaningful ways to help them feel like they belong, that their issues are being addressed, and kind of navigate that trauma that they might be experiencing as maybe the only or someone who's not very much represented in their faculty or student body?
One of the things that I've always thought was really, really good was the concept of safe zones from the LGBTQ community, right? Where there's something on your door that basically says, this is a place where you can come in and be yourself and be accepted. I think that it's important, and that's why it's so important to diversify our faculty and diversify our staff, because the students need someone to talk to that they believe understands what they're going through and understands how, and can help them figure out how to deal with it. There's that whole concept of having difficult conversations, right? Sometimes it's just not a conversation. Sometimes you just need to say something really, really mean and just walk away. But, I often feel that it's the microaggressions sometimes. The in-your-face racism, I can just ignore as stupidity, okay? But the microaggressions really eat at you day in and day out. And it eats at the students as well. So what I've always tried to do is make them know that our offices, every single person that works on my team, is a place where you can go and share whatever you need to share, get whatever advice you need to get, and we will help you. If it's something that we need to address, it will be addressed. And you can be assured of that. We will not ignore that these things have happened. Because that to me is the worst part, is when they say something and they tell you what has happened, or they tell somebody and they get ignored, or they get, told, it'll be all right. Just don't worry about it. It won't happen again. Yeah, it will. And it does all the time. So I think our presence is important, and our ability to allow the students to come to us and talk is really important. I'll leave with this. The biggest concept, I think, for me as a minority engineering program director, the biggest thing I learned was creating that sense of community, right? You have to have people around you who understand you and who understand what your life is like. And that sense of community can often really support a student and help them get through the day-to-day things that continue to occur. I'll stop at that.
So I would, that's a really interesting question, Jeremy, and it's got a lot of components to it. So I'll try to be quick with it. I think until you get to like this level, you just avail yourself to people like Bev is saying. You're a safe place where people can go and talk and vent and et cetera. But then when you get to this type of position, now you got to start thinking about, how do I change the system? And changing systems take a lot of time. They don't happen overnight. So you're really almost in a way multitasking. You're being a safe spot in a storm while you're trying to understand the system to change the system. And we've known for a long time we can't keep trying to change and fix the person. We got to change the systems. But I think until many of us are in these roles, unless you get, other advocates. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to look like us that changes the system, because I was a benefactor of many people who didn't look like me, but understood the system was not fit for me. But we have to tell our stories. And so many times, I appreciate Bev saying, I graduated, thank you, Lottie. So everybody says, oh, well, you're a dean. You didn't struggle. You didn't fail a class. You didn't get a no. You didn't get a whatever. No, I dropped out of school twice. So I give a talk from college dropout to dean, because people just think everything was easy for you, and everything wasn't easy. So you have to be authentically yourself. You have to let people in, but you also have to change the system. And I think that's where we are now, where, Bev's been changing systems. I've been changing systems. I haven't stayed anywhere long enough like Bev to make a real foundational change to the system, because I've moved like every 3 years. I mean, the longest job I had was when I was at Nebraska as an assistant professor, who then became an associate dean. But in the little bit of time that I was associate dean, I changed some systems. But I don't get a chance to make real permanent substantive changes when you're changing jobs every 3 to 5 years, because you want to advance. And so now I tell people I'm hopefully in my last job, so before I retire, so I can hopefully change some systems at UT Dallas and then nationally, because now we do have a platform. Reggie's in the National Academy. There's probably Reggie, less than 15 Black folks in the National Academy. So he's going to now get to be a thought leader in some of these studies and reports that we all read and talk about. If we didn't have a Reggie in the room, our voice is not heard. So it's being authentic with sort of boots on the ground, but then it's also going and changing the system. So that's my 2 cents.
So we recently, the Black students at Rice recently put out a list of demands, 19 demands for the administration, which ended up in the front of the Houston Chronicle, and it really has gotten the administration working closely with the students and trying to figure out how we can create a better environment for our Black students at Rice. And so I've had a lot of discussions with our Black students, but what I'll say is what's important, and the students are very comfortable with me. There's a certain level of trust they have with me that perhaps they don't have with other administrators at Rice. But they just don't need to hear from me, even though I'm in a very powerful position at Rice. They need to hear from others. They need to hear from their deans. They need to hear from their department chairs. They need to hear from the president. They need to hear from others that they're going to make a difference, not just me. It can't just be me saying that I'm going to work for you and make Rice a better place. It has to go it has to go across the board, from athletics to the entire community has to change. And that's where they have to hear it. So that's the effort taking place now at Rice, is to make sure that we're working together and trying to create an environment that's comfortable and that's welcoming to our African American students.
I guess kind of related to that, and Reggie, this is something I know that we've talked about, and that is, and there's a question in the chat from Lauren, and the question is about the low number of engineering PhD students, or the conversations you and I have been around Black undergraduate students and talking to them about going to get the PhD and hopefully looking at career tracks in academia. And so Lauren's question is around the fact that a lot of students feel like they've been through trauma in their degree programs. And it's like, I can't, take another step. And I'm happy to hear all three of you really talk about those challenges and those hurdles that you faced, because I was in the same boat, and I was actually talking to my research assistant this morning about the 2 Fs I made in undergrad, and so he was shocked. But how do we address? And I know it does go back to that systemic change, but is there something we can do in real time to kind of address that trauma that people feel they're experiencing, or that people are experiencing, that might be hindering them from moving to whatever that next step is? And that might be from undergrad to grad, or from grad to academia, or progressing in academia.
I just want to jump in really quickly because this was my life. Like, this was 100% my experience, and I I still don't understand why I'm still here, right? Because I I thought that I was in a supportive environment. You know, I did all three of my degrees at the same institution. I love civil engineering and I always will, but I couldn't stay there because of the experience that I had, because it didn't feel like a safe space to me, right? And so, like, what do you do when a space that has historically been safe for you becomes unsafe? How do you pivot from that? And I think that's really, the question at hand.
It's a difficult situation. I'm just going to relay a conversation I had with a African American woman undergraduate at Rice. Now she's going to graduate school. She's a senior, and she approached me and said, I'm thinking of going to graduate school. Very bright, she said, but every one of my classes has nobody that looks like me. Every time I get in a group, nobody wants to work with me. Why should I put myself through 4 more years of this and get a PhD? She said, it's just misery. I mean, it's just really tough. And I sort of tried to explain to her, I said, it's important that people see you. I mean, the mere fact that you get a PhD, you can't imagine the number of lives you're going to touch when somebody sees you in that position. It's going to change so many lives. And so it is tough. It is because we're almost always the only one in our group, the only one in our program, and the mental anguish that really, and the stress and pressure that puts on you is really tough. And so the more people that they see that look like us over time, I think it's going to continue to make the situation better. But it is a challenge that many of our Black and brown students face, without a doubt.
It's interesting, Reggie, that's what you said, because I got a little piece of paper. I've been taking notes, and I wrote down, as Jeremy was talking, be the change you want to see, right? That's what, I mean, Gandhi talks about being the change you want to see. And so maybe, I don't have an answer, Jeremy, for your experience in civil engineering, but the fact that you're still there, you're gonna make some changes. Your new department is going to be different because there was a Jeremy. Now, civil may or may not ever change, but you're in a spot where you can change, and hopefully people, I'm very reflective, and I hope that people are reflective as well and can look back on a situation and say, how did I make that better? Or how were things different because I was here? Right now, I haven't had the challenges that you talked about having in graduate, as by the system, by the people in the program, yeah, but some of them were just ignorant, right? And so, I'm at UVA, and there's a bunch of guys, and they were all from military schools and military guys, and they all huddled up to study together, and they never included me. And there was another white woman who was in my program. They didn't include her either, and she had been a high school math teacher, so the two of us studied together. And then one time we had something they didn't have, and that was the last time we weren't included. So it was like, wait, y'all got some knowledge? We used to call it at A&T, you got knowledge? Yeah, we had knowledge. They didn't have any knowledge. So, but I hope that because of that, they are now different, right? Because they had to change. They had to realize we got to work together because we're all in this together, right? So I think that, I said, I don't have smart words for you about your experience, and it breaks my heart to hear that, because that just wasn't my experience at Texas A&M. I was in a very supportive environment. There were a lot of people who looked like me, even if we weren't in the same department. We had a cohort. So we all would get together and, have birthday parties and do different things. So we supported one another. And the same thing when I became a faculty member at Nebraska. I was the only Black faculty member at Nebraska for probably 4 years in engineering. But there were business professors, and there were political science professors. And even though we didn't all necessarily have the same lived experience, by being a Black faculty member at Nebraska, if somebody was having a party, everybody came. Now, there were some times when people might have had their little crew, but by and large, I hosted the Super Bowl party. Colleen hosted a chili party. Leon hosted a New Year's Eve party, and he showed a movie on the side of his house in the summertime, and you always went. So you had community, even though this, you didn't have everything you needed. You made the best of what you did have. So again, it just hasn't been my experience what you're describing.
And I had community. I definitely had that, and I had support. But that advisor-advisee relationship is supposed to be good, right? In an ideal scenario. And it wasn't that for me. It just wasn't. So at some point I had to decide, this person isn't going to like me. I'm not going to change their mind, but I'm gonna do this work, and it's going to be great work. And there isn't going to be any way that can be denied, so that I can graduate and go do work that I enjoy doing with people that I enjoy.
And I think that's something that makes a difference. And you said the advisor advisee role. And I think that's the problem, because a lot of times, especially when advisors are working with people outside of their norm, and their norm is usually people who look like them and think like them. And so I think it becomes that very rote relationship of advisor advisee, whereas a mentor mentee relationship looks completely different. And I can't tell you the number of times, whether at Rice or UT Arlington, or when I first met you, Jeremy, it's like, the commercial that comes out every year around the holidays with the M&Ms, and they see Santa Claus, and Santa Claus sees them, and they're like, you are real. I encounter that so much when Black students see a Black woman engineer. It's this shock, and it's like, and it becomes this, like you said earlier, I think it was Bev who said, you want to do this, you want to be that support, you want to engage and do everything you can. But at some point it becomes the question of, can somebody else help to do some of this lifting? And so it's kind of recognizing and changing the mindsets of the majority faculty to be able to say, oh yes, I can be an effective mentor to a Black student, and not, treat them any differently, and really have an inclusive team here. And so it is, it's quite the challenge.
There's some work going on here at Tech now. It's about expectations, and I'm hoping I get this right, but basically it's managing the expectations. What does a graduate student expect from the faculty member, from the advisor? What does the advisor expect from the student? And as long as you can manage and work with those expectations, it can be a successful relationship. Now, this is work that Walt Lee and David Knight are doing. They actually have a class where they are teaching the students. I mean, everybody's taking it now. All the grad students are taking it, about, you need to think about your expectations for your advisor, and how do you share what those expectations are and manage that process. And then there's supposed to be an alternate activity going on with the faculty. That's something that I have to look into to find out what happened. But to get them to look at, students are different. What are your expectations? And why are your expectations for this person different than for this person? Should they be? And why does it happen that way? But it's a really interesting thing. I was very lucky. I mean, incredibly lucky. My advisor was in his second year when I became his student. I was one of his first PhD students. So we were figuring our way through the process together, and it worked out very well. I saw other students where it was not the same thing. They had advisors that they couldn't find, couldn't get a hold of, never responded, never gave them feedback. My advisor was all over me, which was fine. That's what I needed. He got me out. That's good. But that I concur with what they said. I'm sorry that this has happened, but I don't know, I think sometimes you just have to leave. Sometimes you just have to leave. It's not the environment that you are going to be successful in. You are not going to thrive, and you're not going to be happy. Any one of those things, my advice is to get out. And there are places where you are wanted, okay? Really, really wanted, and where you will be supported in ways that are unimaginable. Find that place. Put yourself out there. Tech is hiring.
I already tried to get her to come to Houston, so.
I always tell young faculty that I think there's nothing more important, there's no more important aspect of the job than the mentoring of your graduate students, right? I mean, it's not just about imparting technical skills or teaching them how to do research. It's about a set of values that you leave with these students that they then leave with their students. It's almost like raising kids, right? You raise kids a certain way, they're going to raise their kids a certain way, and it goes on for generations. It's the same with faculty, with young faculty. And I think that's where you see a lot of young faculty struggle, particularly if they're from labs that were abusive. You find that they end up working the same way their advisor worked, and they have a toxic environment in their lab, and it just sort of propagates. And so that's such an important skill and value that you can pass on to your students that will live on beyond any of your papers or other products that you may have as a faculty member.
It's almost like in real family relationships, like oftentimes if you don't do the work, you will replicate a toxic home environment. Same thing with like a lab environment. If you don't do the work, you may do it because you think that's how it's always done. I just want to read a quote from Dr. Carlotta Berry in the chat. And she said, "Many went to the academy to do research, run a lab. All other responsibilities are an afterthought. You have to inspect what you expect. You have to reward what you value. Tenure and promotion is not based upon being a good mentor or an advisor. It's about graduating PhDs. And then tenure promotion barely depends on service or teaching at an R1. So I thought that was very, very pertinent to what we were saying. And then she also said, "Thank you, Dr. Adams, for convincing me to get out. I am now living my best life."
Hi, Carlotta. I think Bev touched on something, about leaving, and Carlotta brought it up. When I went to Old Dominion, I went there to be there a long time, right? So I went to kindergarten at ODU. My grandmother was still alive, and I could see her every morning on my way to work. And I lived in the same building with my parents. So like work life was good. Personal life was good. Work life sucked. I don't know how many times I called Bev like, "Oh my God, Bev, this and this and this." And it got to a point where I had to just say, to save myself, I had to leave. There was no Stephanie staying at ODU in any way, shape, or form. I'm grateful for that journey, that stop on my journey along the way. One of the things somebody told me early on, anywhere you go is always part of your CV, because you can't have a gap or people are going to wonder what happened to you, right? But, and it speaks to a question that Carlotta put in the chat about changing jobs to advance. No, I didn't have to change. I changed jobs because in a lot of ways, I wanted to get there faster than somebody else wanted me to. So I could have stayed at Nebraska, and I could have kept moving up. And a dear friend of mine is the dean today at Nebraska, but both of us couldn't have been dean. And we, oddly enough, both got made dean in the same year. I got chosen to go to be dean at ODU. He'd been at Nebraska 20 years and became dean. Both of us couldn't be dean at the same time, right? So for me, for personal reasons, leaving Nebraska was great for me, but I wanted to be close to family. I wanted to get home, so I moved. Coming to Dallas, Reggie, that second chance we talked about, I didn't mess up at ODU, but it wasn't a good fit. But because I was dean at ODU, I firmly believe I would not have gotten this job at UT Dallas had I not first been the dean at ODU, as good or bad as it might have been. And I'm in a much better situation. Everything in my life doubled. My enrollment, my budget, my staff, my faculty, everything is double. So my school is now one of the top 15 in terms of size, or 20 in terms of size, because I'm here. But I wouldn't have been here had I not been there, and I had to leave there to get here. So you don't have to necessarily change schools to move up. It's a matter of what do you want to do, and is that opportunity present for you in the circumstances in which you are? If it is, great, but you got to let people know that. And sometimes people are going to, recoil. I remember a conversation with the president at Nebraska. I asked him one day, he's a chancellor, did you always know you wanted to be chancellor? And he kind of looked, and I said, well, because I think I want to be a university president. Well, why do you think you could do that job? And I don't know if that was because I was a Black woman, because I was an assistant professor. It didn't matter. He was like, kind of taken aback. But then I met some people who were like, that's what you want to do. Let's make it happen. Now I'm at a place where I've been on that path, but that's not what I want anymore, right? I don't want to be a president anymore. I like being a dean. Dean is a good spot for me. And I laugh and tell Bev, I'm like 5-6 years from retirement. So I don't need to be moving a whole lot more. I'm trying to make an impact here, set myself up, have some NSF grants, and go live by the beach and do the things that I'm really, really passionate about. So you don't have to
remember that time I asked you? You remember that time I called you and asked you? Because everybody was wondering, why wasn't I going anywhere? Why wasn't I becoming a dean? And I remember talking to you about it and trying to explain that I was really happy where I was.
Right.
And I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to be a dean.
Right.
But people were making me feel like I was letting them down, or something. It's like, really? This is my life.
Right.
Not yours.
So it's funny, Bev, because last week somebody asked me about changing schools. And I'm like, oh, no. And they said, well, should we call Bev Watford? And I was like, oh, no.
This is amazing. Okay. Stephanie, you mentioned wanting to go after NSF funding and grant funding. All of you have a wide portfolio of grant money, and Yvette, you included. I mean, Kyla and we're just out here trying, right? And so what advice do you have for young faculty who want to follow in your footsteps and follow these paths that you've blazed to administration and academia? How do we go after that money?
I would say listen more than you talk. So whenever we go to NSF, we want to go to NSF and we have our idea. We want to keep selling our idea and telling them about our idea and why our idea is the best idea. And it's like, okay, but I gave you 30 minutes and you talked 29 minutes and then asked me what I thought. So I always tell people, when you go to NSF, you should talk 5 minutes and listen 25. And when the meeting is over, hopefully the person has talked to you for an hour and they've helped you to understand how what you wanting to do fits in maybe in their portfolio, or why it doesn't fit in their portfolio but fits in somebody else's portfolio. It doesn't mean you can't do the work you want to do, but you've got to fit it. You got to fit that, what is it? The square
Package it.
Would you say
You gotta package it right.
You gotta package it, right? So now the stuff that I'm getting funded is stuff that I'm passionate about. I got a 5-year project to work with underrepresented minority graduate students. I got a project to work with minority faculty. I got 2 things that are going to come out soon, I hope. The money's going to come soon, that are just things that I'm passionate about. So now I get to propose the things that I'm passionate about. But my very first meeting was listening. And when I got done, I had 15 pages of notes and an invitation to write out what they would then call a sugar grant. Y'all now know it as an eager. And that set me on my path. But we want to go and tell NSF why what I want to do, you should fund. And they're like, yeah, well, you're close to where I want you to be, but I need you to pivot it a little bit. Oh, I can't pivot it because it's got to be this way. I can pivot any which way you want to pivot for me to get $300,000, because that $300,000 gets me the next $300,000. And I don't see it as I'm selling out. I'm seeing it as I'm pivoting. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah,
Strategy.
I would just add, if you can partner with somebody in your department that's successful and knows how to write grants. It's really an art. It's not, you don't have to be, brilliant to write a good grant. It's about listening. As Stephanie said, it's about selling your idea in a way that is compelling. And there are some people that are really good at it. And it takes practice. So be stressed out if you don't get it right the first few years. I mean, my first 5 or 6 proposals were not funded, and it's really discouraging. It's really tough. My first 2 career proposals were not funded at a time when you only had 3 shots. So I was on my last shot. Fortunately, it was funded, and it was actually the PK. So it was, it was like all the top scores, but it was just sort of the persistence of really learning from your mistakes. If you can, try to sit on a panel, because you can see what the discussion is like, what they look for. So it's really, it's a skill set that it takes time to develop, and you really have to be persistent and learn from people who have done it well, and partner with people who know how to write proposals. And don't be afraid to ask somebody for their successful proposals so you can take a look at it as an example. So there, it's not rocket science. It just takes persistence and really listening and working with people who have done it.
And I will add, it always amazes me that faculty members will give an assignment to their students and expect the students to actually do the assignment, to give them everything that they request. And then there are those same faculty members who turn around and look at an RFP and not put in the proposal what the RFP says you're supposed to put in the proposal. What's wrong with you? I don't get it. And I was an NSF officer for almost 4 years. I saw it consistently, and it was so frustrating. So again, but Stephanie gave the best advice. NSF program officers want to fund you. They're not trying to hold on to that money. It's not their money, okay? They want to fund you, and they will do everything they can to help you be successful.
Absolutely. And I'll go back to piggyback on something Reggie said, and that is team, especially as a new investigator. I know in my time at NSF, there were people sometimes who were on my panels who would put a comment as if it was a weakness that a person was a first-time PI. And I would stop and ask them, did you ever write your first proposal? You got to get the first one. So stop looking at this as a weakness. Now, as a program officer, I'm glad to know that, because then that lets me know this person might need a little bit more coaching along the way if they get funded and things like that. But it's important to build your team. And Bev, I didn't know we shared this in common. My very first NSF proposal was funded as well. And it was the same thing. I was writing, $500,000, my first proposal. But it was something I was passionate about. And Stephanie, I'm going to connect you to this too, because at the time, I think this was maybe during the time you were a AAAS fellow, and you guys did a workshop on, I'm about to date myself. You guys did a CCLI workshop at NSF. So anybody who knows NSF speak, that's old stuff. But I went to that workshop in DC, and I engaged, and it was so hands-on and so spot on. I took what I learned for that program, and I went and applied it to write an STEM proposal. And I wrote that proposal, and it got funded the first time out the door. And so it did take and I remember, if I don't remember anything else from that workshop you guys led, Stephanie, I remember read the solicitation and respond to what's in the solicitation. And that's it. But the other thing that I always coach new PIs on is build your team, because what I did with that proposal, I didn't go about it by myself. I had full professors from almost every department in our College of Engineering who were co-PIs on that project. So they now most of them didn't do anything, but on paper, they gave me the street cred to say, okay, maybe she can get this done. And then I also negotiated with our dean. I was able to get release time because I had a full teaching load and a full advising load. So I was able to negotiate to get release time so I could actually get the work done. Because at that time with STEM, you couldn't build, you can barely build anything in now. But so that's, it's about building that team. It's about listening and just being very responsive to what they're looking for. And there have been conversations I've had with program officers where, like Stephanie said, I pitched my idea and they come back and they're saying, you know what we're really not seeing? That's when you start E.F. Hutton. And when they say, what we're really not seeing is this, that's the proposal you write.
Mm-hmm.
because that's the hole in the portfolio, and that's what they want to know more about.
That's right.
So all of you are tremendous rock stars in all your, aspects on your different campuses. And there are tons of people who want to be exactly like you. So I wanted to know, just generally, like, what are some of the best pieces of advice that you've received, either from mentors or somebody in passing or someone you met at a conference? Just, what was it that made the difference for you? Like things that you can kind of just set your watch by because it was all the way correct.
Well, I'll start with my dad. My dad wrote a book, Get Up with Something on Your Mind.
I have that book. Your dad's awesome.
So I don't sleep very late. Even on Saturday, it pisses me off because I'm like, it's 5:43 on a Saturday and I'm like, oh man, it's like, but it's 5:43 and it's a Saturday. Can I please roll back over? So, it's like, I'm driven and I work hard, but I also, people who know me know I play hard. Right. So, Bev, I hope you don't mind me sharing, but for the week before Christmas, Bev and her family, some other friends and I, we all went to Aruba for a week. And we sat by the pool and we chatted and had our fruity drinks and, came up with some projects we could work on together. But I'm focused on doing the best that I can do at this point. And people talk about legacy. And I didn't start off thinking about what is my legacy going to be. Now I think about my legacy. I think about how can I knock down walls for the next people that come behind me. So y'all say, how can we be you? I told anybody who says I want to be you, I said, no, you want to be better than me. You don't want to, people say, oh, I want to be like Mike. No, I don't want to, I want you to be better than Stephanie. I want you to go, if I go to be dean, you need to go be provost. If I decide to go be provost, then you need to go be president. If I decide to go be president, you should run the whole system. Because that's what people did for us. People, my grandparents were tobacco farmers. They got up and they worked hard every day. So I work hard, but I also have now learned how to play hard. That's my advice.
My advice is, and this is something I truly believe, if you don't like what you're doing, do something else. Okay? If you don't get up in the morning and want to go to your job, find another job. And it can be whatever, sometimes, I make my kids laugh because I tell them when I changed jobs, I took a pay cut. Okay. My husband couldn't move with me. And when he finally moved, after he got vested in his company, he was out of work almost a year, couldn't find a job. But I was so happy where I was. He was happy for me. And he was like, something will change, something will come up and it will work. And it did. It ended up working out. But I tell people that I took a completely alternate path to becoming a professor. I don't know of anybody that took the path that I did, that literally stopped. When I changed jobs, I said to myself, I will be an associate professor forever. And I'm going to be so happy at that. It's just going to be great. And what happened with me was the world changed around me. I never changed. I never changed my path. I never changed what I wanted to do. The world changed around me, and it enabled me to do more than I ever thought I would. And I see that for just about everybody. If you are doing something that you truly love, you will do it well, and you will be recognized for it and applauded for it. So that's my advice.
My advice would be just to be yourself. Be yourself all the time. You're going to have, in these leadership positions, you always have so many difficult decisions to make that typically end up, pissing off half the people on either side. And you always have to do what you can live with, what you think is the right thing, because ultimately people are going to be upset on all sides of the equation. But I want to be able to live with myself and go to bed knowing that I did the right thing. And so that's my piece of advice.
I think that's really solid. And it's hard to believe we've been really going at it this long. We are so happy that you joined us today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us online. And I see the shout out to Dr. Adams' book, Get Up With Something on Your Mind. I have that book as well. And so we want to thank you guys again for joining us. We're going to close out just briefly here, and we're going to ask people to make sure that they connect with us through the podcast, that they connect with our guests through social media, really keep up with the awesome things that they're doing. Kyle and Jeremy, why don't you tell them about Modern Figures?
Okay. Modern Figures podcast is elevating the voices of Black women in computing to inspire the next generation of the advanced technology workforce. You can find out more about us at modernfigurespodcast.com, and you can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can subscribe to our show pretty much anywhere that you get your audio. So be sure to check us out.
Yeah, and it's a conversation style podcast where we interview Black women from the computing community, and we talk about technical topics such as like their research, by like anything from AI to machine learning to robotics. We've had the whole spectrum of guests. We even had a 16-year-old tech boss come on, and we have people also in entrepreneurship. So Black women doing things in tech. And then we also talk about personal things like how to survive and doing it all. And a lot of the topics we've touched on here, being the only. What else there? We're almost at 10,000 listens, so that's fun. Subscribe if you have not already.
Excellent. And I'm a fan and I'm a subscriber, but my podcast, Engineering Change, is focused on how we engineer change, how we go about it in a very intentional manner to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in engineering education. And it's founded on 3 principles. Actually, it's 1 principle, 3 pieces. Redefine engineering education. So image who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering. De-silo our academic programs and approach to problem solving, and fine-tune our culture and climate so that it's conducive to everybody's success. So redefine. And so you can subscribe, as Jeremy and Kala pointed out, everywhere you get your podcasts, and go to engineeringchangepodcast.com. You'll see a lot of information about our past guests, resources that they have available online. And on the very front page of the homepage of the website, you can leave a comment, or if you have a suggestion for a topic for an episode, please leave it there. Very soon, I'm going to be launching a new promotion, and we're going to start a new segment on the show that will be Q&A with Q&Y. So Q&A with my producer Quincy and myself. And so we're going to be taking phone calls and getting messages from the website to be able to answer your questions on the podcast. So thank you again for joining us today. Any last, that didn't sound right. Last words, that didn't sound right.
Final thoughts.
Anything, final thoughts. There you go.
I would simply say people were asking, what can you do and how can you make change? And you all are living proof of how to do that. Your ingenuity to start these various podcasts and bring people on to share their thoughts. And Kyla, you mentioned 10,000 folks, and so y'all are changing. You're using your platform appropriately, not appropriately. You're using your platform that you have to make change and get people thinking very differently. So kudos to you all for your concept, your innovativeness to put these podcasts on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say that I agree with Steph, but I'll say also, I bet you this was not an overnight thing. You had an idea at some point, and you kept at it, and you kept at it until it became real. And that's how you make change.
Thank you, Yvette and team. This was wonderful. You're touching many, many lives. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. It
Yes,
was great.
thank you.
Thanks everybody on Periscope and Facebook and YouTube.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Hang on.